So, I want you to imagine this for a second. It is Wednesday, April 22, 2026. You are walking into the office, or, maybe you're just logging onto a morning video call.
Right, the usual morning routine.
Exactly. And someone looks at you, gives a quick nod, and asks this incredibly common, almost automatic question, which is, how are you? And without missing a single beat, without even consulting your own internal state, you just reply, fine, or maybe, I'm okay. It's one word, it's fast, it's totally safe, and if we're being completely honest here, it is entirely untrue.
Oh, absolutely untrue. I mean, it functions as the ultimate conversational reflex, right?
Yeah.
It requires zero actual processing power. It's really serving as a social toll booth rather than an actual inquiry. You pay the toll with the word fine, and you're allowed to just proceed with your day.
But the problem with paying that toll is that you aren't actually devoid of complex feelings in that moment. You might be carrying, a lingering exhaustion from an argument a night before, or you might be profoundly bored with your career trajectory, or just feeling really empty. Yeah.
Or buckling under the pressure of the week.
Right, but all of that complexity, all those sharp edges and heavy nuances, they just get shoved into this tiny, socially acceptable box labeled fine.
Which really turns this everyday interaction into, kind of a quiet tragedy. Because the other person is doing the exact same thing. They hear you're fine, they respond, yeah, I'm good too, and two entire inner worlds just pass right by each other without making contact. We exchange data, but we actively avoid connection.
Wow, yeah. And nobody is necessarily being malicious here, but nobody is being real either. And that is really the mission for today's deep dive into our source text. We are going to explore why we've systematically lost our emotional vocabulary.
This is a huge issue.
It really is. So we're unpacking the psychological roots of this disconnect, the societal systems that basically force this behavior, and how ancient philosophy offers a surprisingly practical roadmap to get our emotional language back.
Yeah, and the material frames this not just as a casual communication problem, but as a foundational philosophical crisis. Just to set the stakes a bit, consider Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre noted that what defines human beings, our core defining trait, is our self-awareness.
Right.
We don't just exist in the world like a rock or a tree does. We are conscious of our own existence. We perceive our own states of being.
We are aware that we are aware. It's like we are the audience to our own internal play.
That's a great way to put it. And then, consider Albert Camus, who wrote extensively about humans navigating an absurd world, a universe that demands meaning but refuses to provide it.
Yeah.
But the source text makes this really compelling argument that before we even get to the grand absurdity of the universe, we are facing a much more immediate, intimate linguistic crisis. We don't lack emotion. We are entirely overflowing with it. What we lack are the actual words to process it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to trace where this linguistic deficit actually begins. This habit of flattening our reality into I'm fine isn't innate, right? We aren't born with this reflex.
No, definitely not.
If you look at a toddler, there is this massive contrast. Little kids don't walk up to you and calmly say, excuse me, I am currently experiencing mild anxiety regarding the unpredictability of my nap schedule.
Right, they bypass the intellectual filter entirely.
They just scream, or they laugh with their entire physical body. There is zero gap between what they are experiencing internally and what they're projecting externally.
It's totally raw. They lack the sophisticated vocabulary, sure, but they possess total alignment between feeling and expression. The source material points out that the architecture of our mind changes as we are socialized.
How so?
Well, we aren't actually taught to understand the nuance of our feelings as we grow up. We are overwhelmingly taught to, manage, control, and ultimately hide them.
Oh, for sure. Think about the conditioning we go through. Don't cry in public. Don't be so sensitive. Calm down. We're trained to sand down our emotional edges so we don't disrupt the people around us.
Yeah.
And we praise this behavior as maturity, but it's really just a masterclass in suppression. But if we are just squashing these feelings down, they don't just vanish, right? It's like shoved in junk in a closet and pretending the room is clean. Or like minimizing background apps on your phone. You don't see them on the active screen anymore, but they are absolutely draining your battery in the background. Eventually the door bursts open or the system crashes.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly your background app analogy aligns with the psychoanalytic model, specifically Sigmund Freud's hydraulic view of the mind.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Freud argued that repressed feelings do not evaporate just because you consciously refuse to look at them. Emotional energy cannot be destroyed, it only relocates, it goes underground and morphs into this nameless, vague, heavy sensation.
So because we refuse to give the specific emotion its proper name, it kind of metastasizes into something much harder to diagnose.
Exactly. The text highlights an incredibly common manifestation of this. You walk through your front door at the end of the day, drop your bag and say, I am so tired.
I say that literally every day.
Right. But if you run a diagnostic on that feeling, it isn't physiological fatigue. You haven't run a marathon. Your muscles aren't failing. It is an unnamed emotional weight.
Oh, wow.
You lack the specific vocabulary for it in that moment. Maybe it's chronic disappointment, or maybe apprehension about your future. So the brain just grabs the closest, safest label available, which is tired.
That completely flips the script on how we view our own moods. I always assume my physical exhaustion is causing my bad mood. But this suggests the lack of expression is what actually manufactures the physical symptom.
And Nietzsche adds a critical layer to this too. He argued that unexpressed psychic energy eventually returns as impulsive behaviors and reactions that baffle even ourselves.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the emotion demands to be processed. If you deny it language, it will bypass the language center of your brain and take the form of irrational action.
So, because I didn't clearly articulate that I felt ignored during a morning meeting, I find myself snapping at my partner that evening over how they loaded the dishwasher.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe the fight is about the dishwasher.
You defend your anger about the dishwasher because your brain needs a rationalization for the emotional background app that's draining your battery. The feeling just found a completely alternate route to the surface.
That makes so much sense. But pinning this entirely on childhood socialization feels a little incomplete to me. We have to look at the machinery of the modern world we're operating in right now. It feels like our current societal infrastructure is actively hostile to deep emotional processing.
Oh, it is entirely hostile to it. We talk a lot about late-stage capitalism optimizing our time, but sociological frameworks tracing back to Karl Marx's observations on capital suggest it has literally optimized our emotional spectrum too.
Wow.
We've applied supply chain efficiency to our souls. Systems prioritize whatever yields fast, measurable value. Deep, nuanced emotional exploration just does not yield an immediate return on investment.
Yeah, you can't put emotional vulnerability into a quarterly spreadsheet. Nobody is earning an end-of-year bonus for having a beautifully articulated 30-minute realization about their underlying grief.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, sociologists like Max Weber pointed out that modern institutions run on the frictionless transmission of data, not the depth of human understanding.
Frictionless is the perfect word for it.
Right. And Michel Foucault's theories on power dynamics explain the mechanism behind this perfectly. Foucault argued that systemic power doesn't necessarily operate like a dictator barking orders. Power operates by creating environments.
Creating environments? What do you mean?
In certain architectures, specific behaviors naturally become incredibly difficult, while others become effortless. We aren't legally forbidden from having deep conversations, but the rhythm of an open-plan office or a corporate Slack channel, it dictates that communication must be brief, actionable, and devoid of emotional friction.
That is so true. We see the downstream effects of this environmental power constantly in our digital lives. When someone texts you, the medium itself discourages a paragraph. You reply with a quick, okay, or yep.
Yeah, totally.
On social media, instead of articulating, I am feeling a profound sense of isolation today, we just post a meme about being antisocial. It's like we're trading in our emotional currency for pennies just so we can complete the transaction faster.
Which brings in Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulation. Baudrillard theorized that in hyper-modern society, we no longer communicate our actual reality. We merely simulate it.
But wait, let me challenge that for a second. Isn't an emoji just the modern equivalent of a facial expression? If I smile at you in person, it's a shortcut. I don't say, I am experiencing joy. I just smile. Why is sending a smiley face over text suddenly this grand linguistic crisis that Baudrillard is warning about?
That is a really crucial distinction, actually. When you smile at someone in person, it requires profound physiological alignment. Your autonomic nervous system engages, mirror neurons fire between you and the other person, micro-expressions cross your face. Your body is physically manifesting the internal reality.
Okay, I see.
An emoji requires zero physiological alignment. It is a decoupled signifier. You can be sitting in a dark room completely numb and select a laughing emoji with tears. You are not communicating emotion, you are simulating the communication of emotion.
Oh, man.
It requires no vulnerability, no bodily truth. It's undeniably faster, but the mechanism actively bypasses your emotional processing center.
That is terrifying. It means we are actively training our brains to divorce our physical reality from our communication. And if you use those simulations long enough, if you rely on the laughing emoji and the phrase, "I'm fine," for a decade, what happens to the architecture of your own mind?
That's the real issue.
Because we are shifting from how the environment forces these shortcuts to the profound internal damage those shortcuts cause.
Yeah, the damage stops being merely interpersonal and becomes intrapersonal. The language you use with the outside world ultimately dictates the language you have available to speak to yourself.
The source material paints a scenario that I think literally everyone has experienced. Sitting in a room with someone you care about, wrapped in this thick, heavy silence. You're feeling a massive surge of something, a knot in your stomach, a tightness in your chest. But because you have relied on shortcuts for so long, you have absolutely no idea where to start untangling it, so you just swallow it, you stay silent.
It is an imposed emotional illiteracy.
So what does this all mean? Are the philosophers arguing that if we stop practicing the vocabulary of our emotions outwardly, our internal cognitive landscape actually begins to shrink?
They argue exactly that.
Yeah.
Albert Camus identified the gap between what we feel inside and what we are capable of articulating as the exact coordinate where true loneliness is born.
The exact coordinate. Wow.
Yeah. Loneliness isn't just about geographical isolation. It is a structural void. It's having a sprawling, complex universe inside of you that you cannot bridge to another human being because the bridge requires language.
Yeah.
And you've forgotten how to build it.
That makes loneliness a failure of translation. It's like staring at a blurry photograph and you know it's a picture of something threatening, but because it lacks definition, you can't tell if it's a monster or just a shadow on the wall. If you can't name the monster, you just live in a constant state of vague dread.
And Sartre would argue that your self-awareness relies on that definition. Consciousness requires language to draw boundaries. Without language, an emotion doesn't politely wait in a filing cabinet. It bleeds out into a boundaryless, unmanageable fog.
Right.
And this is where the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius becomes incredibly relevant. Aurelius practiced rigorous daily self-observation. He didn't do this out of vanity. He did it to defend his inner citadel. But you cannot defend an inner citadel if you can't name the walls.
You can't.
Because we never pause to granularly define our feelings, distinct experiences like situational sadness, existential anxiety, temporary loneliness, and intellectual boredom all melt together into one giant crushing blob of not okay.
We become total strangers to our own nervous systems, but realizing that also forces a pivot, I think. We can't just play the victim, shaking our fists at late-stage capitalism and algorithms forever. We are complicit.
Exactly.
We are the ones hitting send on the emoji. If we are actively participating in the degradation of our emotional language, we maintain the agency to reverse it.
This raises an important question regarding accountability. Sartre called this bad faith, the act of pretending we have no choice but to conform to the system. We tell ourselves we have to say fine because the world is moving too fast. But Sartre insists we always possess agency, no matter how constrained the environment. We consent to the superficiality.
But why do we consent? What is the psychological payoff for participating in this? Like when a close friend genuinely asks, "How are you holding up?" and the environment actually permits a real answer, why do we still default to the armor of, "I'm fine"?
Because reclaiming that language introduces immense risk. Seneca, another pillar of Stoic thought, understood that the most harrowing part of the human experience isn't necessarily figuring out what is wrong with us. It's daring to face what we understand and expose that truth to the external world.
It's scary.
When you deploy precise, accurate language for your emotions, you forfeit your plausible deniability. You hand the other person the actual coordinates of your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, if I say I'm fine, I remain invulnerable. I am a sealed fortress. If I take a breath and say I am feeling deeply insecure about my worth in this relationship right now, I have just handed you live ammunition. I am entirely exposed to your judgment or your dismissal.
Right. We utilize fine as a linguistic shield. It deflects the interaction. But the compounding cost of carrying that shield every day of your life is that you eventually forget what your own skin feels like beneath it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The source material doesn't just leave us stranded in this existential dread. It charts a surprisingly actionable way out, rooted in Stoic methodology. And it doesn't require us to suddenly become radical poets crying in the middle of a grocery store.
No, thankfully. It actively advises against emotional dumping. The barista taking your coffee order does not need a hyper-specific 10-minute monologue about your generational trauma.
Right. So the Stoic philosopher Epictetus stated that we are not disturbed by external events themselves, but by the cognitive judgments we make about those events.
Yeah.
And the solution lies in creating space for that judgment. The text outlines a specific protocol, which they call the micropause.
It is remarkably simple in theory, but incredibly disruptive to the societal conditioning we just discussed.
Mm.
A micropause is a deliberate 2-second delay. Before you fire back an automated text response, before you open an app to numb a sudden wave of discomfort, or before you reflexively tell your colleague you are fine, you interrupt the default mode network of your brain.
You just stop.
You take one beat to ask your executive function, what is the actual specific reality of my internal state right now?
It's an exercise in emotional granularity. You are rebuilding the architecture of your mind, one accurate word at a time. The source provides excellent blueprints for this. During that 2-second pause, you might realize that the label tired is entirely inaccurate.
Right.
You dig one layer deeper and discover, oh, I'm not tired. I am actually feeling profoundly disappointed after that morning meeting.
Or you feel that familiar hollow ache in your chest on a Sunday afternoon. The reflex is to label it emptiness and immediately simulate connection by scrolling through social media. But the micropause forces you to sit with the void long enough to accurately name it. You realize it is situational loneliness. Or perhaps it is a lack of direction. By applying the precise word, you define the edges of the monster. It shrinks from an overwhelming infinite fog down to a manageable, finite problem.
And communicating this doesn't require a dramatic speech. You simply upgrade your daily interactions by, 10%. You transition from the dead end of, I'm fine, to something slightly more tethered to reality, like, I'm fine, but honestly dealing with a bit of stress today. It is a microscopic shift, but you're insisting on living in reality.
You cease simulating your existence. You stop participating in the hyper-reality that Baudrillard warned about, and you begin the slow, deliberate work of re-architecting your internal world.
Yeah.
You start separating that monolithic blob of not okay back into distinct, navigable experiences.
That's powerful.
The ultimate objective is not achieving flawless communication with an inherently flawed society. The objective is achieving clarity within your own mind.
You are stepping out of the blur. So, to kind of summarize this journey for you, yes, our hyper-efficient, fast-paced society makes emotional depth incredibly inconvenient. The system is definitely not rigged in favor of our feelings.
Got it all.
But as Sartre, Camus, and the Stoics remind us, we still have a choice. We choose the words that leave our mouths. The goal isn't to become a perfect communicator. The goal is to stop being a blur to yourself. You don't need perfect language, just language that is true enough so you don't lose yourself in the ambiguity of, I'm fine.
That captures the stakes perfectly. And as we conclude, consider a completely different angle, which is the generational impact of this linguistic erosion. If we are struggling to maintain our emotional vocabulary after having grown up in a somewhat analog world, what happens to the children who are currently being raised entirely within these simulated, emoji-driven environments?
Oh, that's a heavy thought.
If their baseline for emotional regulation is selecting a prepackaged reaction on a screen, what kind of internal language will they even possess to lose? What kind of inner citadels are we building for the future?
A question that absolutely demands more than a micropause to unravel. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden layers of our everyday conversations. Next time someone asks how you are, maybe take one deliberate beat before you answer. Catch you next time.